Good morning, everybody. Glad you came. And I think we have some really important topics to talk about today. And our objective isn't to scare you, but hopefully you'll feel a little urgency in terms of being more prepared. If you noticed on the sides of the room, there are some flyers. So almost everything in my presentation comes from this flyer, which was produced by the state of Utah and the, I think, Geologic Department. A lot of great information there, and I hope you'll take one home. If you have friends, you're welcome to take one for them as well. So as I start here, I'd just like to introduce myself and get this show on the road. My name's Steve Boyack, and I'm a neighbor of yours, even though I live only maybe 3 blocks away. I'm in another stake, and I am the stake emergency preparedness person for Lehigh North Stake. And I also work with the city. You saw that logo. It's also on my shirt. The Lehigh supports a community emergency response team. And we provide training, and we do a lot of other things in the community. And if you'd like to know more about that, I'm happy to share that with you. I've done a lot of outdoor things in my life. I have 4 boys, so I've gone camping and done a lot to learn about preparedness. I'm an NRA firearms instructor. I'm a state concealed firearms permit instructor. I'm a drone pilot, and I'm an apiarist. Anybody know what that is? That's a beekeeper. Although I'm taking a pause on that because my bees attacked me and I'm a little afraid of them now. So one other interesting thing I'll just tell you about myself. I worked for 3 generals. And you might think you don't know a lot of generals' names, but I guarantee you know some of these generals. Right? I worked for General Motors, General Electric, and General Dynamics. So I have quite a varied career, but mostly it's been in the technology sector. So I want to start my presentation with just a little quiz here, just a little thing to get you thinking here. So do you think this is true or false? A person is, say, 50 times more likely to be killed by a bee than by a bear. If you think that's true, raise your hand. So you're thinking in the right direction, but it's actually false, because you're 180 times more likely to be killed by a bee than by a bear. But you really shouldn't be afraid of bees because, you know, in the grand scheme of things, you're much more likely to succumb to other forms of accidents. Car accidents, for example, are very deadly. Who's afraid of bees? Yeah. Well, I got stung about 20 times when I was trying to rehome a beehive and had to go to the ER because I started to swell up. But still, it was, you know, one bee sting for some people could be deadly. But truly, in the grand scheme of things, because we're going to talk about earthquakes today, you can see that, you know, all these natural calamities that exist, you know, that people have, they're regionally in nature, whether they're floods or hurricanes or major storms. Earthquakes are up there pretty high. It's the #2 cause of death in terms of natural disasters. And of course, they're regional, but they can happen in lots of different places. And as you'll see, and we'll talk about today, earthquake issues should be paramount in our minds for what can transpire here. But again, just to set your perspective, mosquitoes and rattlesnakes are way more dangerous to us than are earthquakes. Okay, we live in a particular area that is prone to large earthquakes. And people sometimes talk about what would be the big one in terms of an earthquake happening in our area. So we're going to talk about what this danger is, you know, and how we can be better prepared individually. We live in earthquake country. We essentially know that earthquakes do occur here. Earthquakes are likely to occur here in the future. We know the type of damage that earthquakes will do, and we know what to do to minimize or reduce those effects on us. But in spite of all these things, we also know that most people don't do much, if anything, to prepare. And the consequences of those inactions could be very, very dangerous. Here in Utah, we could consider ourselves as living in earthquake country. That means that there is a major chance of an earthquake happening in our area. Experts say that there's maybe a 50% chance that in our lifetime, there could be a very large magnitude earthquake. All right, so take a quarter out of your pocket, heads or tails. That's the chances that we have. That's pretty high chance that it will occur. And the reason that they know that is from historical records that they can tell. In fact, if you look at the geology of our valley, you can see where the fault lines lie, right? As you look along the benches of the mountains. So you know that there is very likely an opportunity for a large earthquake here. Now, I'll again reiterate that as some people are coming in, be sure and pick up one of these, because I know a lot of the text in my presentation is rather small, and I don't expect that you're going to necessarily be able to read it off the screen. So it is here in the magazine that you can take with you and get additional information. So don't be fooled into complacency. Our ancestors have lived here in the valley for almost a couple hundred years, not quite. And in all that time, there really hasn't been one of these large magnitude seismic events. The last one was over 300 years ago. But we know that from the geologic record, that is a basic period of these major earthquakes occurring approximately every 300 years. And the last one is a little bit overdue because it was about 350 years ago. So you'll see that we live in this area called the Intermountain Seismic Belt. And specifically for our area, it's the Wasatch Fault Zone. And all these red lines, these are the scary parts where the slippage can occur between different fault lines. And you can pretty much see that the fault lines run right along the benches primarily. And so most of our homes are within a couple of miles of these earthquake faults. Now, the Wasatch Fault is an interesting, has interesting characteristics. It's one of the largest fault zones in the world. It's runs from southern Idaho down to central Utah. And so it's made up of 10 distinct segments. And each of these segments can rupture independently. And that's what the record has shown. And when they rupture, they can produce a greater than 7 magnitude earthquake. I'll talk about what that magnitude number means in terms of the impact to us. So these faults, they have been able to get through geologic record of over hundreds and hundreds of years to find this period of time that the earthquakes occur in our region. Now, a little bit about how earthquakes are measured. We've all heard of the Richter scale, right? And so that's the first thing they tell you, you know, it's a magnitude 5 earthquake or some such number. And these numbers are measured on a logarithmic scale. And so that means if you go from an earthquake 5 to an earthquake 6, the amplitude of the earthquake, as it's measured by that little needle, is 10 times the magnitude. But that's not the interesting part, because there's another factor in play there, and that is the amount of energy released. So if you go from a 5 to a 6, the amount of energy released, that's what's going to shake our homes and buildings, make things fall down, is over 31 times greater going from a 5 to a 6. That's significant. So when you talk about an earthquake magnitude 7, that's horrific in terms of what is going to happen. All right, so hopefully that's got your attention a little bit. Now, when an earthquake of that magnitude occurs, you can see that the stretching that occurs here, it says in 300 years since the last earthquake, that stretching over the years has been about 150 inches. Now, if it actually hasn't stretched, that means that energy is building up. And that means in one event over the course of seconds, that slippage could occur. And some experts have predicted that the valley floor in Salt Lake could fall 10 to 15 feet. And if that were to occur, what happens to our infrastructure of water, electricity, sewer? That means, complete breakdown in terms of the capacity to support us in the future. So this slippage that occurs is very significant. And it's a very seismically active area. Historically, we can see that in these different fault segments, you can see the different magnitude of earthquakes that have occurred and how often. Now, the one that is most overdue is the Salt Lake segment. And we can't say, okay, that's too bad for those guys. If that segment lets loose with a 7.0 earthquake, we're basically at epicenter ourselves for the term amount of damage that we'll experience. So it's quite significant just to know that that is essentially overdue. Now that period of time in the Salt Lake fault zone is about 1,300 years, but it's overdue for that. And when I talk about the 300-year period, that's any one of the 10 segments in the Wasatch fault zone. And so every 300 years or so, one of those fault zones is going to have a major event. And Salt Lake is the one that is most overdue. Now, this represents all the earthquakes that have been measured over the last 100 years or so. And you can see that they range typically, from 6 to 6.5 are typical ranges. We have kind of two things to consider. And one is all of these earthquakes pretty much are around the populated area, right? I mean, that's where we live, all along the Wasatch Mountains and down south. And you can pretty much follow I-15 there. And you can see there's a significant amount of earthquakes, many of them too small to be felt. Some of them we feel and occur at various periods of time. But because we live in that populated area, it's very significant in terms of what we can expect to experience ourselves. The last significant event occurred in 2020, so it's been about 5 years, and it was a 5.7 magnitude earthquake. How many of you felt that earthquake? Remember it? Even this far away, it was felt. And it was significant in terms of the damage. And knowing that an earthquake, if it were to be 6.7, would be over 30 times more energy released. So that just gives you an idea of the perspective. After the earthquake, you can see all the collection of other aftershocks that occurred. So if or when we have a significant event, it's going to be followed by hundreds and hundreds of aftershocks, some of them very significant. If you remember or saw any of the YouTube videos of the recent earthquake that occurred it was around Thailand, or I don't remember which country, but in that whole area, you could see, it was interesting to see the water sloshing out of the swimming pools on the high rises as the buildings swayed. So the effect of that can be widespread in terms of the area. Now, as far as the seismic hazard, we live essentially at ground zero, and you can see the color-coded area there, the red and purple area, and that's the most highly populated area. And so that's a very significant in terms of what we can expect. Now, besides all the shaking that occurs, earthquakes, and by the way, I lived in Southern California for 30 years. And so I experienced the Northridge earthquake and several others that were quite significant. And I just left the Bay Area after the Bay Area earthquake and had friends that still lived in the Bay Area at the time. But even those earthquakes, as large as they were, will pale in significance to the potential energy that could be released by an earthquake here. Besides all the shaking that's going to occur, there are other things to worry about. Okay, damaged infrastructure, water, gas lines rupturing, et cetera, fires that occur. And you remember back in the, historical era, San Francisco earthquake, the fires that occurred afterward took untold numbers of lives. Hazardous materials that may be released. If you live near a dam or a lake, dam failures and sieges, essentially, it's like a tsunami in a lake as that water is sloshed back and forth. And surface fault ruptures that are going to disrupt and interfere with our infrastructure. Another serious thing for us to consider is liquefaction. And so the Mexico City earthquake that occurred, this was a wake-up call to people in the United States because this really hadn't been well understood. What occurs in liquefaction is, depending upon the soil underneath our homes and buildings, if it's not stable enough, it can essentially shift and shake and turn to kind of a gelatinous substance during all that shaking. And so what that essentially means is it makes your foundation unable to be supported, and buildings can tip and fracture. And so we live in an old lake bed here, Lake Bonneville, and the remnants of that, and especially around Great Salt Lake and here in this map on Utah Lake, you can see this is a liquefaction map produced by the State Geologic Department. And you can see these areas are quite hazardous in terms of what could affect us. Now, what does that mean to us personally? We live near that area, and so that means that get earthquake insurance because the damage that would occur from your home won't be covered otherwise. And so that's something to consider. We have fire insurance. If you live near a stream or lake, you might have flood insurance, but earthquake insurance is a very important thing to consider. Now, if I haven't...
You have a brick home, it's crazy expensive, but if you tell the insurance company to replace it with stucco, then the price becomes way.
Oh, that's a good point. Good point. I don't know if everybody heard that, but he said if you work with your insurance company and tell them that you're willing to have your brick home replaced with stucco or something else, it can lower your cost. Okay, hopefully I haven't scared you too much, and that's why we said maybe not necessarily bring children to this, but I'm going to show you a film that was produced by the state of Utah. They have a great website. It's called Be Ready Utah. And on their website, they have some great materials. And this video was produced, and it's quite an eye-opener in terms of setting our expectations of what might occur should or when the big one happens here.
The cold winter day in Utah. Along the Wasatch front, hundreds of thousands of people are busy at work. Many of them are commuting to jobs in different counties, far from where they live. 80% of the state's 2.7 million people live and work in the region. Families and many others must have settled. The largest earthquake that hit Utah in modern times is the rupture travels approximately 25 miles north along the Wasatch Fault. Some react appropriately, others don't. Over 10,000 buildings collapsed. The shaking lasts for nearly a minute in some areas, damaging 285,000 buildings. Even in buildings that are not damaged, possessions fall down or are thrown across rooms. Infrastructure is destroyed. Utilities throughout Utah are disrupted. 2,300 people will die. 30,000 people will be injured. And $35 billion in building damages will occur. Finally, the shaking will go. A large number of people are trapped. That's still been sold. With 165 start, some coming into the hundreds of thousands of people are finding this problem. That's in the system. Months ahead, tens of thousands of active struggle. And no, traveling around town would be more difficult and time consuming. And 300,000 displaced members. All your level of personal preparedness will determine your quality of life after the quake. Here are a few things you can do to prepare. It's a good idea to have a fire extinguisher, a first aid kit, and at least a 3-day supply of water for each person in your household. Have an emergency plan. Decide where you will meet up with your family after an earthquake. Make sure there is a person out of town you can contact to let your loved ones know that you're okay. When remodeling your older brick home, consult a professional engineer or the Utah Guide for the seismic improvement of unreinforced masonry vaults. Consider whether earthquake insurance makes sense for you as part of your financial plan. You should also secure furniture, your hot water heater, and heavy or valuable items so they won't fall. Preparedness is not only for the home, but also for business. Be sure that your company has emergency plans for a major earthquake. Empower yourself and your family. Be prepared. For information, www.bereadyutah.com.
That's kind of sobering. If we think of the major disasters that, we've been attuned to in our lifetime, that pretty much is at the top of the list. We have had the ability to break that down and look at the potential losses in terms of how many deaths, how many injuries, property damage, et cetera. And we know that not just our infrastructure will be overwhelmed. I mean, we have one hospital in Lehigh, well, now two with a children's hospital and one nearby. They'll be overwhelmed, significantly overwhelmed. Imagine 30,000 people that need treatment. So knowing how to take care of yourself and your family to the best degree possible is a huge advantage. We can look at the potential of this catastrophe in terms comparing it to other things like Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Maria, 9/11. And you can see that this ranks up there with the major disasters that we've experienced in our country. And so we know that there are some significant impacts that would be upon us. So I think I've answered the question why we should prepare. And now I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the things, pardon me, that we can do to be better prepared. The first thing that I would say is to consider your family. Where will your family be potentially? How will you reunite with your family? How will you get back together? And have you come up with a family plan? Discuss with your family. In an event, we are apart from one another. Where will we gather? Who will we meet up with? How will we make contact if our phones are inoperable? We may have the ability to call outside of Utah. And typically what happens in these circumstances is that The telephone capability, what may be left, is going to be blocked and reserved for emergency workers. But oftentimes, long distance calling is still available. So if you have Aunt Betty or Uncle Fred in Arizona or Colorado, and you've told everyone in your family, if you can't reach mom and dad, or we can't reach one another, try calling Aunt Betty and just saying, hey, I'm at college, I'm okay, I'm gonna hang out here until things settle down. So have a point of contact or a relay that you could share among your family and make sure everybody knows that's our plan. Or if we can all meet together, if we can't get to our house, we're gonna go to Aunt Marva's house in Springville, or someplace where we can all get together. So have a plan, have a backup plan for communications and getting reunited. And be aware, does your children's school have an emergency plan? Do they have emergency supplies, food and water and things like that to tide them over for a period of time? Now we're here on Saturday morning, and I expect we're all wearing comfy shoes and comfortable clothes. But if the earthquake happened Tuesday at lunchtime, and many of you would be at work, are you wearing comfortable shoes to walk home? Is it 2 miles, or is it 10 or 20? So you might want to keep comfortable shoes in your car, or what we call a get home bag that has some water and snacks and comfortable shoes, a jacket, things like that, so that you could get home if you're going to have to walk home. The roads might be drivable, but if one bridge is out, that means traffic will be backed up to a degree that you might not be able to drive. So be aware of those things and have a plan. And if you can get home and drive home, you might not be able to get gas. So do you have enough gasoline in your car? Do you keep it above half full so that you can get home? If you run it to empty, I'm guilty of that a lot. Instead, if you keep enough gas in your car, and why do you do that? Well, if electricity's out, gas stations can't pump gasoline. So even though they have gas, they might have people there working, but they might not be able to deliver it to you. So keep enough gas in your car that you can always get home. Medical help may not be available. The hospital itself might have suffered damage. Many of the care workers might be at home or not on the job and might not be able to get there themselves. So there might be just whatever staff is on hand. And so the number of casualties and the number of people that are going to need help are going to overwhelm them to a great degree. We're actually blessed in Lehigh. We have 4 fire stations, and they're terrific. But what if we have 8 fires or 10 or 100? They're not going to be able to address them all in a quick and timely fashion. And so for a period of time, we're essentially on our own. And so whatever tools, whatever things that we have on hand, first aid supplies, knowledge, and ability is going to be what we're going to rely on for those first hours or days before help can get to us. Another thing to consider is our homes. And so we're going to talk about a home safety checklist, and you can take that home and you can go through with your kids and you can look at different things in your home and address their safety. But older homes might need to be retrofitted. And so if your home is much older and it might need to have some seismic retrofitting to make it more safe and secure. Another issue is personal property. Much of the injuries that occur in an earthquake are from things falling on people. Maybe it's a chimney or the facade of a building falling off, or a dresser falling on a child or a large TV, things like that. So anything that you can do to mitigate it, bolt things down, secure them as best you can to walls. You can go on Amazon and type earthquake safety kit, and you can find things, supplies to secure things to walls and make your home more safe for the people that live there. You may find that services we commonly rely on are unavailable. The ATMs aren't going to work. So some stores might be open, but they won't have a way to take your credit card. And so do you have cash on hand that you could buy necessary supplies or things that might be available? So consider that. And like I said, you might not be able to get gasoline for a few days or a week or more. And so having enough in your car that you can get by, or having other forms of transportation, bicycles or motorcycle or things that don't take as much energy might be important. So look at the things that you rely on and ask yourself, what if I didn't have that for days or weeks? How would I get by? And come up with a plan B, an alternative. What can you do to mitigate that? Many jobs that we have will be over or displaced or gone for a period of time. And so is your job at risk from a potential event like this? If you work at a store and the store is damaged or demolished and unable to open for a period of time, what will you do in the meantime? And so that means having some savings set aside that you could take care of yourself and family for as long as you may need. Other types of businesses will be disrupted. And so it's going to be very important to be able to take care of ourselves for as long as possible. And that leads into financial preparedness. And I know that, we've been taught to have set aside, what we can to be, financially able to take care of ourselves for that period of time. But in the meantime, you can set aside some supplies, and not just food, because we talk about that a lot, having a food supply, for a few weeks or months, but also other things, medicine and other things that you may need, batteries and who knows what. And again, there are some great lists in the magazine that can give you some good ideas of things you can set aside. Other things that you can do are essentially follow these 7 steps. So as we talk about these 7 steps for preparedness, we break them up into 3 distinct areas. What are the things that you can do now before the earthquake? What are the things that you should do during the earthquake or that time of the emergency? And then what should you do after the earthquake? All right, so let's break that down and talk about these 7 steps. Okay, before the earthquake, we're going to talk about preparedness and go home and conduct an earthquake hazard hunt. And so in our magazine, there's a nice checklist that you can go through and assess, the preparedness of your home and find the potential dangers that might exist and what you can do about them to eliminate them or to mitigate them as much as possible. And so really go home and do a hazard hunt. And as I mentioned, the list breaks down into several areas: home hazards, earthquake hazards, fire hazards. And as you look at the items on the list, you can check them off and assess, your readiness and preparedness. And so things that affect small children is an important category, especially the things that can fall on them or the dangers that can ensue. And so use this checklist in your home. It's great as a family activity to not scare your children, but enable them to feel prepared, because that feeling of well-being, of being prepared, I know what to do when that happens, that eliminates the fear. That takes it away. So even though it could be a major and serious thing, I have tools and knowledge at my disposal of things that I can do. And that leads into creating a plan. So build this plan. It's unique to you and your family, the things that you would do as you go through preparing of what you're going to do in the event that this occurs. The other thing is to set aside all the things that you would need in an emergency. We break these down into these categories: shelter, clothing, water, food, hygiene. Dan will talk about that in greater detail because it's a super critical, important thing. You know, I'll just say, imagine for 3 months or longer, not having the ability to flush your toilet. If I tell you, starting right now, you can't flush your toilet for 3 months, what are you gonna do? And I venture that 99% of us haven't really prepared for that event. And that, even though many people will die in an earthquake, after the earthquake, a significant amount of people are going to get sick and die because of disease and illness. So, as unpleasant as it may sound, or we think, you know, and you only have to go back 2 generations to, I remember going to my grandpa's and they had an outhouse. We have to think in terms of being able to care for ourselves in other ways, because the infrastructure is going to be damaged. Envision Utah put together a timeline, and it's very interesting to look at because they say, okay, the earthquake happens on this day. Here's what happens 15 minutes later, 1 hour later, 3 hours later, 1 day later. And they break it down out to 5 years. And for many services that we rely on, it takes nearly that long to have everything put back together. The conveniences that we have of turning the tap on and having, not just having water, but having pure and germ-free water, and being able to flush toilets, being able to power our convenient devices. You know, these are things that we take for granted, and taking for granted is the thing we can't do anymore. So assemble some of these supplies, because just having food to eat is not enough. You can survive with that, but we need to thrive. We need to recover, and we need to rebuild after an event. And so if you break this list down, these categories, there's a nice list here again in the magazine that gives you, you know, a good checklist of things to do, put it together. And I'm not saying go out and max your credit card today and buy all this stuff, but put it together little by little as you can and as you're able, and it'll be very important. My fear is that my children aren't prepared. All my children are grown and living on their own, and they are all, you know, life is great, nothing to worry about. And so I have to not only prepare for myself, but I have to prepare enough that I know they're going to come back to mom and dad's when and if something happens. So you have to consider the extended family that you'll need to support with whatever supplies that you put together. So that checklist is great, and you don't need to take a picture of it. You don't need to write it all down because it's in the magazine there. And also, this is available in an online version, and so you can download it. The source is listed on the magazine. Download it, email it to your friends and family, and get them involved, because the more prepared they are, the better off we are. Right? We're only as strong as the weakest link in the chain of our family and loved ones. Do you have a question?
Lived in California for 45 years through all the earthquakes, and most of the injuries were after the earthquake.
Right.
And the problem was, which I haven't seen addressed yet, is glass. And so I interviewed several towns afterwards, and you need a metal dustpan. You cannot pick up glass with a plastic one. You need a round, heavy-duty garbage can that you can wheel into your house to put things into that will, and the other thing you need is those bandages for, what are they called? Butterfly bandages. So
for lacerations.
Because there's lots of major slices and that.
Good points. Good point. So I'll just say into the speaker, so it's recorded here. The sister mentioned living in California and that much of the injury and damage came from glass breakage and cleaning up after, having metal dust bins to store that damaged material in, and having first aid supplies like butterfly bandages. And by the way, another plug for CERT, we teach first aid, and also Red Cross teaches first aid. And so you can get some training and learn how to take care of yourself. The number one thing to do is stop bleeding. That is the biggest cause of death from those types of injuries. So knowing how to stop bleeding should be the highest priority on your first aid list. But look into CERT and Red Cross if you'd like additional training.
Say one more thing. The biggest problem was people didn't know where their children were. We have to give our children permission. We had inside of our door a Ziploc bag with permanent markers. You have permission to write on the driveway, write on the door, write on the garage door, where the neighbor took me with them to this place.
Yeah.
That was the pure hell of everything, is where are my children? And, you know, so we had a place to meet, but sometimes strong neighbors want them to go somewhere else.
Right.
They can tell me where I can see it without going into a house.
And that should be part of your family plan, communication. How am I going to let my family know where I am? And like the sister mentioned, in our family, we have, you know, write with lipstick on a mirror, you know, if the mirror is not broken, or write it on the wall where you have gone if mom and dad aren't there. So communication is an important thing, getting back together. These should all be a part of that plan that we talked about in an earlier step. The potential weaknesses of your home are part of the analysis that you'll go through to identify, you know, what may happen and how you will deal with it. Part of that means, you know, what am I going to do with no electricity, no water, no sewage, toilets and whatnot. These are all weaknesses in the sense that these conveniences are no longer available to us. The next thing, those are all the things we're going to do before the earthquake. Now, what do you do during an earthquake? I mean, you've all heard, and children are taught, if there's a fire and your clothing catches fire, what do? You stop, drop, and roll. Okay, in like manner, for an earthquake, you should know to drop, cover, and hold on. Because what you're trying to do is protect yourself from falling debris, from glass, from bricks, from bookshelves, from whatever might be falling down upon you. I just thought of one other thing that when the sister was mentioning, you know, the challenge of finding children. You remember after 9/11, you know, people had the hardest time finding family, many of whom lost their lives, but you would see those walls. They would put pictures up. I'm looking for my son or my brother, or my sister. And so they would put their pictures up there. So have plans of alternate ways to get together and communicate. Okay, so during the earthquake, we're going to drop, cover, and hold on, because we want to eliminate what is the biggest cause of injury during an earthquake, and that's things falling on us, not necessarily collapsing buildings. When a building collapses, there are lots of voids. Voids are areas that you can hide in, or you could be protected in. And so if you can get to one of those potential voids before things are collapsing and falling, you can save your own life. So teach this to your children also. The next thing is things to do after an earthquake. Okay, the first is an assessment. You know, we want to assess injuries that are potentially life-threatening. And so we want to check that life safety is at the top of the list. And we want to do all we can to provide aid to those who need it, because there is the golden hour of time when people are injured, that if we can stop bleeding, we can keep their heart beating, and we can get them through that initial trauma, that we can save their lives. The next thing once we've determined everybody is safe and okay, check for hazards. Do you smell gas? Do you have power lines that have fallen down and are arcing? So you need to kind of go and make sure that hazards have been addressed so that you have a safe place to stay. And then you can start to assess the damage. If you have your phone, take pictures of everything. Because if you have insurance, or even if you just need to know what you need to replace, you need to have some documentation of that. Now, not earthquake related, but the bigger things that I lived through in Southern California were fires. And in my community, I live north of San Diego, we had 2 wildfires within 4 years of each other, and both destroyed over 1,000 homes in our area. So when we talk about, you know, the damage that occurs in a catastrophe of that magnitude, our brains turn to jello, just to mush. And if you don't write something down and if you don't document it, you're not going to remember it. You know, if you are under that type of pressure, your mind goes elsewhere. One of my friends was told to evacuate. He had 30 minutes. And so if you had 30 minutes, and an earthquake's not going to give you 30 minutes, but if you had 30 minutes to think, what do I need to take? Now, right now, sitting here, we're calm and collected, and you'd come up with a great list. But he managed to save his barbecue and a couple of other silly and stupid things. I think his television. But did he remember his important documents, his photo albums, his memorabilia? No, he lost all that in the fire. His home burned to the ground. So in like manner, our lives are going to be disrupted significantly, and we'll just be running around and not able to think clearly. And if you can just remember to take your camera out and annotate and document everything, that will help. Did you have another comment?
Have everything in your fight with the insurance company will be much easier. But this
Very
is
true.
everything on,
Very true.
and then what can they say?
And that should be part of your checklist as you're preparing, you know, before the earthquake. Take those pictures and document everything. All right, the last step is keep following your plan, you know. Make sure that you've checked all the boxes. If you have to evacuate or go to a community shelter or family's home, you know, what are the things that you're going to need? What do you need to take with you? Where are we going to get instruction in an event like this? You know, the state has a way of sending and broadcasting emergency information. And so you need to know how to tune into that and how to listen to it. You've all heard the alerts that come on TV or radio as they test the emergency alert system. And so in an emergency, those communications will be forthcoming. And so we need to listen to them. Get your out-of-state contact, keep them apprised of what you're going through. So not only we've communicated initially, but keep them up to speed on what's going, because other extended family and friends are going to want to know as well. And so those are some of the things you can do as you go through these 7 steps. It's not a huge list. It's very doable. You know, when we think of this major type of thing we're preparing for, you break it down into these 7 things, and it's much easier to digest. There's some great websites. FEMA has a lot of preparedness information. If you just Google FEMA earthquake, you'll see a lot of great stuff there. State of Utah does as well. And I mentioned Be Ready Utah. And this little pamphlet has some of the best information that is available. So take advantage of that. So let me just summarize a few of these things and cover them. We know our most populated area, ourselves, our family and loved ones, we live on this major fault zone. And we also know that it's overdue, significantly overdue. And so it could happen tomorrow, or it could happen 50 or 100 years. I mean, it just is not scheduled, so we just don't know. But what we do know is when it happens, the impact is going to be severe. So whatever we can do today, tomorrow, next week, whatever we can get done are going to greatly benefit us. You know, whether it's just having enough flashlight batteries or having, you know, enough emergency food. Those things are going to be really important. And water. And I can't stress water enough because that is extremely important. You know, you can go 3 seconds or 30 seconds. How long can you hold your breath without air? 3 minutes. Let's say you can go 3 minutes without oxygen before you have severe complications. You can only go 3 days without water. Now, water is not going to be available to us for weeks and weeks and weeks. They'll truck it in from who knows where, or they'll drop it in by helicopter, but it's going to take a while. So whatever you can set aside now is very important. And you should kind of calculate. You need a gallon or a gallon and a half per person per day. So if you say, I want to be prepared for a week, you can calculate how many are in your household, times that by 1.5 gallons, and you know how much water you need to set aside and have. And if that runs out, what's your plan B? Well, there's the water reservoir down there, but it needs to be filtered. And so do you have chlorine tablets or filtration things? So have your plan B, and recognize that you're going to have to take care of yourself for a period of time. You're going to talk about this more, right?
A little bit, yeah, but just a point, since you mentioned it now, if you can only survive 3 days without water, it's important to remember that when you say that, if you don't have water, you're dying for 2.5 of those 3 days.
Good point.
You're not comfortable up to the end of the 3rd day.
Good point. Very important. So can't stress water enough. I mean, we talk about food storage, but you can go without food for days, but you can't go without water for a period of time. All right. So you've heard the statement, when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Right now. So just like preparing for this earthquake event, the second best time to prepare is now, if you're not already prepared. So go do that now. And when I say go do that now, I really mean go do it now. And use the resources that are here in this book and on FEMA's website. They'll help you tremendously as you go about that. All right, I have a quiz. I want to see if anyone was paying attention. All right, so here's quiz question number 1. Each whole number increase on the Richter scale is how many times greater energy released? Over 30. I think it's 31.2 or something. So usually people say 10, but no, it's well over 30. So that's significant. Okay, you did really well. All right, next question. On average, Utah experiences a major 6.5 plus magnitude earthquake every how many years? 300 years. Okay, well, you're doing really well listening. Okay, last question. What is a strong underground shaking that causes the ground to temporarily lose its strength and behave like a viscous liquid? Liquefaction. Excellent. All right, well, you all scored 100%. You did really well. We have a local preparedness group. If you use Facebook, if you don't, sorry, but if you use Facebook, just type Lehigh Preppers, and we have a lot of great material there. There's like a files section. We store great things there, like what kind of generator should I buy, or you know, how should I store water? People have answered questions or put up nice things there that you can take advantage of, or you can ask questions to people. This is an interesting quote, attributed to Benjamin Franklin. I wasn't there, but it's attributed to him. By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. Just think about that. All right, we are gonna take additional questions later. But again, I'll stress, be sure to take one of these pamphlets. And you're welcome to take others if you have people that you think would be able to take advantage of them. All right, so I'll turn the time over to Dan for our next thing. We're gonna take about 5 minutes to reset our tech.
Keep going, actually. Well, as soon as he's ready.
As soon as Dan's ready, we're gonna start. If you need to take a restroom break, please do.
Am I using my laptop?